researcher working at the Stengl Pines Biological Station. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Stengl because it's a special place for me. I've been working there for over 2 years now. So Stengl is located between Bastrop and Smithfield cities, and that's 40 miles east of Austin. It's about 600 acres in size, and Stengl falls within the post-oak savanna ecoregion in Texas, and that is part of the Lost Pines block. I don't know if you have heard about the Lost Pines block, but that's a place where we have the low-lolly pine species, and it's disjunct from the western main location of this species. So Stengl is part of the UT Field Station network, and it's a place where UT students can go and learn about this different ecoregion and also conduct research. Unfortunately, in 2022, the station was affected by a wildfire. You can see a picture over there when the fire just ended. And even though a sad event, it gave us an opportunity to conduct research on post-fire, to understand how an ecosystem is affected by fire and also how it can recover after a fire. So in 2023, they hired me and my team, that you can see on the picture up there, to conduct different surveys on soil, plants, and insects at Stengl. Today, I'm not going to talk about that research project, but I can say that we're also studying plants and pollinators at Stengl, comparing what is happening between burned and unburned areas. Something else I want to say about me, you might have noticed by my accent, I'm not from the US. I was born in the Peruvian Amazon, and my country, Peru, is located in South America, and my hometown is right in the center of the country, and it's a high elevation Amazonian area. So my hometown is surrounded by plants, by green mountains, and I grew up surrounded by plants. And I think that's what inspired me to be a scientist that studies nature, and also specifically someone who studies plants. So here I'm giving you a view of the different plants and pollinators that I have studied through my career. I consider myself a scientist that studies the ecology and evolution of plants and how they interact with their pollinators. So in this talk, I'm going to tell you stories of these different organisms, the flowers and their pollinators. And talking about that, it's also talking about a part of my own life. And I could say that I could be considered a flower too, because my name, Rossana, has the name of a flower. Which flower?
Rose.
Yeah, rose. So my parents named me after a flower without knowing I was going to dedicate my life to study flowers. And that's a kind of a crazy coincidence in my life. So to start, I want to ask you all, why should we care about the life of flowers? So please, you can shout out your answers so we can hear you.
That's how we get peaches.
Oh, we get peaches, yes. What else?
They give us fruit and vegetables to eat so that way we can stay healthy.
Yeah, food and vegetables that we can eat and develop and have a nice life, hopefully. What else? What else we get from plants? Yeah.
Bees take the pollen from flowers to make honey, and without flowers, we wouldn't have any honey.
Yeah, that's great. We also get honey thanks to the plants and the bees collecting the nectar from the plants. Yes, here.
Would you like Mike?
Insects eat plants.
Most insects eat plants, and that's great. I like this person is thinking not only about humans, but also about other animals that use plants for their lives. What else can we say that we get from plants? Beauty, yeah, I like that answer. Beauty, of course, and you can think about art. Flowers have inspired a lot of art.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else?
More plants from plants.
Yeah, more plants. Yeah, that's important. Flowers are the key organ for plant reproduction. So without flowers, we wouldn't keep getting more and more plants. that's amazing. I love all these answers, and it makes me happy that you do care about plants and flowers. So I'm gonna go back to this answer, our food, of course. That should be the first thing we think about when we think about flowers and plants, because we get our food thanks to them. All our food we get thanks to flowers. Even when we don't eat a fruit that develops from a flower, like for example bananas or peaches or mangoes or even cucumbers, tomatoes that are also fruits. Even our crops from which we feed other parts of the plants, like leaves, stems, or roots, also those crops need flower for outcrossing reproduction. And that means that one individual has to get pollen from a different individual. So that outcrossing pollination is beneficial for a better genetic diversity in the seeds that we may use in the next crop season. So that's super important for us. And better genetic diversity for our crops is important for them to resist environmental changes or diseases. Something else that people did say that about plants, it's that plants are the key component of our terrestrial ecosystems. So I'm talking about our home, inland. 90% of plant species have flowers, and it's thanks to plant reproduction that these ecosystems are maintained. And we get many ecosystem services from them, like the regulation of temperature, collection of water, the protection of soils, places where we can be happy and entertain ourselves. And these services are not only for us, but for all other species with whom we share our home. Yeah, so and here you can see some places in Texas, the national parks in Texas. I think it's Guadalupe and what is the other one?
Big Bend.
Yeah, Big Bend. And these are places in my country, the cloud forest and the desert and the Amazon. So, okay, to start, let me give you a quick overview about the topics I'm going to be talking about. First, we're going to look at the developmental aspects of flowers, including the timing of flower and the fertility of the reproductive organs. Then we're going to explore the function of different floral traits, focusing on the function that involve attraction, reward, and feed of the pollinators. And finally, I'm going to talk about part of my PhD research where I carry out experiments using floral traits, modifying floral traits. So let's start with the timing of flowering. So how do plants actually produce flowers, and what factors trigger this process? There's not an easy answer to those questions. There isn't a single mechanism. Different plant species are going to respond to different factors and start flowering. And there are many physiological pathways that can lead to flowering. So it always depends on the species. But broadly, we can categorize these factors into two things: environmental signals and internal signals. So within the environmental signals, we can mention some of them because there's so many of them, but I'm going to talk about day length, temperature, and water availability. Some plants will flower when the days are longer, while other plants will flower when the nights are longer. Also, some plant species need to go through a period of cold to know that they have to flower after they've been exposed to the cold. So they avoid flowering in the winter, and they can flower when the conditions are better later in the spring. Also, temperature and water availability can regulate the timing of flowering, affecting the growth of the plants. Typically, plants will grow faster in warmer temperatures versus colder temperatures, and that will make the flowering happen earlier. And also plants, if they get stress, for example, drought stress, that can also induce flowering earlier. Now, moving on to the internal signals. The first one is about the growth process. So when a plant is still a juvenile, it doesn't get the internal signals for flowering, but once it reaches a certain maturity stage, then new physiological processes are going to be activated, and this signal the plant to flower for the first time. These physiological processes are controlled by genetic factors. So when a gene is activated, new molecules are formulated within the plant, and those play a key role in regulating the flowering. There's also the internal clock. Like us, plants also have an internal clock that runs on a roughly 20-hour cycle, and these circadian rhythms help the plants to perceive changes in the environment, such as the day or the night. And then they can open their flowers when the time is the best to maximize their reproduction. So that's about the timing of flowering. And I have my first story about timing of flowering. I got to see how sometimes plants, when they get very stressed, they can flower in a time when they weren't supposed to flower. And I witnessed that in one of my projects, and it was devastating because we were growing these plants for over a year and a half, and we knew in the second year of growth, in the month of November, they were going to start flowering, and we were preparing everything to be ready for an experiment in November. But in June, the plants were attacked by caterpillars, and they damaged the leaves to such degree that my plants started flowering in June. So at that point, we knew we couldn't do anything to stop the flowering, and we just have to cancel our experiments in November. So yeah, nowadays we know that environmental stress, like for example drought stress, can also trigger flowering earlier, and that's a problem because if the plants produce their flower early, they might not match the time where their pollinators are emerging and are available to conduct the pollination. So that could be terrible because, as we said, plants are important, are the base of the terrestrial ecosystem. A second story I have about timing of flowering comes from this tree. Let me drink some water. Yeah, my second story comes from this tree from the family Caparaceae. The species is called Polycodendron scabridum, and their common name is zapote. It's a word in Spanish, or maybe in a different language, but it means something like sweet fruit. So I got to know this species conducting different trips to the north of my country, because this tree grows in the dry forests of Peru, and actually Ecuador too. We share that ecosystem with Ecuador, and we share this plant species between Peru and Ecuador. And the flower always seemed pretty cool to me. So back in 2016, just out of curiosity, I wanted to know about the pollination system of these flowers. And I looked for information on the literature available, and I couldn't find a source that would talk about the pollination of the zapote. I found a not very reliable source that said that the zapote were pollinated by honeybees. And when I read that, I knew that was impossible. And why? That's because the honeybees are from Asia, and the zapote is from South America. So the pollinator of the zapote has to be a species to grow originally in South America. So it couldn't be the honeybees. So then I decided I had to study the pollination biology of the zapote. In my country, there are many people who study pollination. So then it's like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So that was a side project during my PhD. Don't tell my advisor. So to start understanding the pollination biology of the zapote, first we needed to know when the flowers open, because that wasn't even written in the literature. So I got help from some students in the northern of Peru, in the city of Chiclayo, and we went to the field, looked for the zapote trees, look for when they have flower buds, and then we brought some cameras and we recorded these trees during the day and during the night because we didn't know when the flowers were going to open. And then we got to see that the flower buds were opening between 6 and 7 p.m. So with that we knew that the zapote was a night blooming plant. And in this video you can see how, this is an accelerated video, so you can see how the flower is opening. And what we mainly see here, like those sticks are stamens. So it stretches all the stamens, and even the tip of the stamen where we have the anther, even the anthers changes their shape because the pollen is becoming available. So also during our recordings, we got to see which animal were coming to the flowers. And we saw a lot of nectar bats. They were the most frequent visitors at night, and also we saw some moths, hot moths coming to the flowers. So we got enough evidence to say that the zapote is a night blooming tree, and their main pollinators are nectar bats. So here I want to show you a picture of the zapote tree with fruits. You know, after the pollination happens, they develop the fruits. And the fruits are very important in this ecosystem because there's a lot of animals that feed on the fruits of the zapote. And that was one reason for me to carry out this study, because this is a key species for the dry forest of Peru and Ecuador. And also there was one animal in particular that motivated me to study the pollination biology of the zapote. And I want you to guess which animal I'm talking about. So I'm gonna give you some clues. It's a mammal. It's a quite large mammal. It has a very thick coat, thick fur.
Bear.
A bat?
Also, that is the only species of that type of mammal that we have in South America. And here in North America, you have several species. Usually use the color of their fur to call their common names of those plants. Yeah, bears. I have more clues, but you got it. Yeah. This person actually said it first when I was just saying, it's a big mammal, a bear. Yeah, it's a bear. And I don't know if you knew that we have the spectacle bear or the Andean bear in South America. And even though this species has different populations in the mountain forest, in the cloud forest of the Andes, it has this special population in the dry forest. And in that area, these bears depend on the fruits of the zapote. The researchers from the Spectacle Bear Conservation have followed different Andean bear individuals, and they have seen that before the zapote fruiting season, the bears get very skinny, like skeleton and skin. And then it happens, the zapote fruits, and they feed on the zapote, and then they can accumulate enough reserves for the next months, and especially the females can accumulate enough reserves to be moms and to feed their cubs. So these animals is one of the reasons I wanted to study the zapote. And it's not only the bears, but many other species that feed on the zapote fruits. And I really love this story because it beautifully illustrates the deep connections between plants, their pollinators, and the ecosystem they sustain. So now let's start with fertility. So to talk about fertility, I want you all to see this diagram that you might have seen at school. It's showing the parts of a flower. We have the protective parts, the sepal and the petal, that protect the reproductive organs, which are the pistil and the stamen. So the pistil is the female face of the flower, and it has three parts: the ovary, where we can see the ovules, the style that connects the ovary with the third part that is called a stigma, and the stigma is where the pollen gets deposited coming from a different flower, and where the pollen germinates to fertilize the ovules. The male phase, the stamens, have two parts, the filament and the anther, and it's in the anther where the pollen gets produced. So ideally, what should happen in a flower is that it gets pollen from a different flower, from a different individual. So again, there we're talking about this outcrossing pollination, which is going to improve the genetic diversity of the seeds. So plants have developed different strategies to improve this outcrossing and to avoid self-fertilization. That means that their own pollen gets to their own stigma. And I'm going to talk to you about two different plants that have strategies to avoid self-fertilization. The first one comes from the bellflowers family. It's called Campanulaceae. The genus is called Burmeistera, and this group of plants, their common names is also Burmeistera. So these plants I studied during my master's, and the Burmeistera flower has here the sepals here at the base, the petals here, and it has this tubular structure where the reproductive organs are going to show. They're going to show here at the tip of this tube. So Burmeistera is going to have a strategy of showing the male phase and the female phase at different times. So here on this picture on the left, we have a Burmeistera flower in the male phase, which is what happens during the first day the flower is open. So if we see here, it looks like a white dust, and that's the pollen.
Oh no!
Look, it's on the tree.
This has happened before, so don't worry. We got this.
Commercial break. Back to your regular scheduled program. It looks like a downward. That's what I was gonna say. I just didn't know if y'all were on my way.
Good? Yeah, you can see.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the second day, this flower is open for about 4 days. So in the second day, what is going to happen is the pistil is going to start growing below the stamens. So it's going to come growing here below, and it's going to push out all the pollen that is left in the flower. So all the stamens are going to fall from the flower, and then we're going to have the stigma exposed. So this is a flower in the female phase, and here is the stigma. So now the flower is ready to receive the pollen from a different flower. So it's avoiding this self-fertilization. And this strategy, when the flowers have the male phase and the female phase at different times, it has a technical name that is ecogamy. These plants are also pollinated by nectar bats, and I have a video of how these visits happen. They're super fast. That's the real-time video, and then it comes a slow motion video, so you maybe can see better the visit.
Wow.
There it is. Yeah. Okay, now this second story is about a plant that has a different strategy to avoid self-fertilization. This is from the family Gentianaceae. The species is called Sabbatia angularis, and the common name is pink rose. And this plant actually grows in the Austin area. It's the only plant that, for now, this is the only North American species I have studied. So the pink rose has a different strategy. In this case, these flowers have the male and the female organs together in the flower. Here you can see the stigma and the anthers. But I hope you can see on the picture, the stigma part of the pistil is actually kind of leaning towards one side of the flower, while the anthers are in a whorl in the center of the flower. So what is happening here is that there is a spatial separation of the two different female and male organs. And this strategy is called ecogamy. And that's a strategy many plants apply. I don't know if you have seen maybe flowers that have the pistil very high and then the anthers very low. So that's another way to separate the two organs spatially. But interestingly, I did a research with a professor in Philadelphia, and we look at the life of this flower, and it's actually this flower that inspired the title of my talk, because we follow these flowers for about 15 days. Like, this is a species that is one of the longest lifespan of a flower I have studied. It can live from 9 to 15 up to 20 days. And we track how the organs were changing throughout the life of this flower. And we saw that the pistil, which, as we can see here, in day 1, it looks like this. So in the stigma area, it splits in 2 lobes. And while the days pass, it keeps splitting more and more, and also curls. The 2 lobes you can see. By day 12, it is pretty open, and the lobes are curved. And what we saw was that at this time, at least 1 lobe of the stigma was touching the anthers of the plant, the anthers of the flower. So it has like a delay system or a delay mechanisms to get some pollen in case during the previous day it didn't get any pollen from a different individual. So it's like a backup plan. During most of its life, it avoids the self-fertilization, but towards the end, if they didn't get any pollen, just like, I'm gonna get my own pollen and still produce seeds. So the next season I can grow again and try again the outcrossing pollination. So that's a pretty cool strategy that we got to see while studying the pink rose. Okay, now we're gonna move on into the function of floral traits, which it's mainly related to pollinators. It's about 3 things: to attract the pollinators, to reward the pollinators, and to have a good fit for the body of their pollinators. And I'm going to talk about all these different floral traits and how they contribute to each different functions. First, we start with scent. Scent is a common trait that we find in species that bloom at night, because as you might imagine, at night, nobody can see, can have a good vision at night because it's too dark, even the pollinators. So many nocturnal pollinators will use the scent of the flowers to be able to find them in the forest. So and here I have a couple of examples. The Burmistera plants, which produce a lot of kind of like sulfur scent, called sulfurous scent. And we also have many cacti that are night blooming, and they also produce scent. Flowers pollinated by bees also produce scent. And here I have a couple of examples from the Austin area that you may know, and maybe you might have a smell in the spring: the lemon bee balm and the Texas mountain laurel. Another trait that is important for attraction of pollinators is colors. And here we're going to talk about these species that are visited by bees. And bees have an innate preference for the color yellow. So many plant species that are pollinated by bees have yellow, maybe all the flowers yellow, or have some areas in the flower that are yellow. For example, the pink rose, you see here at the center of the flower, it has this kind of like star-shaped part in the petals. That signals that there is where the reward is for the bee. Also, we have another example from the family Costaceae, the genus Costus. This is the group of plants that I studied for my PhD. So the Costus flowers have these 2 yellow lines, and they are visited by orchid bees. So the orchid bee lands on top of the yellow lines, and then it crawls inside the flower. So these yellow lines are indicating the bees where their reward is. The flowers for hummingbirds are typically bright colors like red or orange, but hummingbirds aren't born with an innate preference for a color, but in contrast to the bees, they learn what is the color of the flowers where they can find food. And so when they visit to red or orange flowers, which are colors that the bees don't go to, is typically where they find nectar. If they go to a yellow flower, most likely the bees already have taken that nectar. Because the bees don't go to these bright colors. They actually cannot see very well the red colors, so that's why they aren't attracted to red flowers. So the hummingbirds learn that this is a good resource for them. And for nocturnal pollinators, a typical color is white or pretty like pale colors, because those are going to be the ones that will be more visible at night. Something interesting about color, it's that some species will change the color of their flowers once they have been already pollinated. So we have these two examples in Texas, the lemon bee balm and the Texas bluebonnet. The lemon bee balm, when it's already been pollinated, it's going to turn a little darker, kind of like pink, darker pink, and then the bees then know that they should go to the paler flowers because they're going to find nectar there. And the bluebonnet, this area that is typically white or yellow, turns to pink or purple, so the bees learn that these flowers don't have much nectar anymore. So that's pretty cool about color. And now we're gonna check the size of flower, which is another trait important for attraction. And when I talk about size, I'm referring to maybe a bouquet that has a lot more flowers than another bouquet. So the most attractive one is the one who has more flowers. But it could also refer to the size of an individual flower. So in this group of plants, the Costus group that I studied in Peru, we found different populations of the same species that have different floral length size. So the highland population have longer flowers, and the lowland population have shorter flowers. We think that that is happening because in highland there is less availability of bees. These plants are pollinated by bees. So that's why the population have evolved to have longer flowers, so it can improve their attraction for the bees. And also you can see this population has more yellow tones in the flower, and we said that yellow is a very attractive color for bees. So it has evolved a longer flower and also flowers with more yellow in their tissue versus the lowland. Now we're going to talk about the next function of floral traits, which is reward. So the pollinators come to the flowers not to pollinate the flowers, right? They come to eat, to find a reward or to find something they can use for their own. So very common rewards are nectar and pollen. And on these videos, you're seeing costus plants, ones that are pollinated by orchid bees and others that are pollinated by hummingbirds. So these two pollinators are getting nectar from these flowers. So another common reward is the pollen, and actually the pink rose doesn't produce nectar. It only has pollen for the bees. And the bees are going to collect pollen from many species to feed themselves or their brood. Another reward that maybe you haven't heard before is scent. And there is a group of bees that I already mentioned, the orchid bees, who have a particular behavior, a particular reproductive behavior. In the orchid bees, which are very beautiful bees, very colorful, they have these bright metallic colors. For me, they look like Transformers bees, so that's how I usually call them, the Transformers bees. The male of the orchid bees they collect scents in the forest and make perfumes that we know now, since 2023, that they use these perfumes to attract the females. They collect scents from different resources in the forest, but a very common one is its flowers. So here you can see a male orchid bee collecting scent from this costus flower. What they do is they're gonna wrap their front legs in the surface that has the scent, and then they're gonna fly and put the scent, store the scent in their back leg. And you will see when they are flying there, that's what they're doing. There you can see again the fly, and they're like passing something from the front legs to the back legs. So the males that have the more volume, or like the males that have more quantity and a more complex perfume, are the ones who have a higher reproductive success. Okay, now the last functional floral traits, which is to feed, to have a good feed for their pollinator body, and in this case, the size and the shape of the flower are the most important floral traits that contribute to a good feed. So what do I mean by a good feed? The flower has to achieve two things. One, it has to allow the pollinator to reach their reward, whatever the reward is. In this diagram, the reward is this yellow part, which is representing nectar. And the second thing is the pollinator has to touch their reproductive organs. And in this diagram, that's represented by this orange circle here. So as you can see, the pollinator is reaching the reward and is also touching the reproductive organs. So that's a good feed that this flower has for its pollinator. If the pollinator, let's say, doesn't reach the reward, it's not going to come back to this flower because it's not getting anything from it. And if the pollinator, the non-pollinator, doesn't touch the reproductive organs, it's not going to do any pollination for this plant. So what happens if two species that live in the same place are very similar and they have a similar feed for their pollinators? So how can they avoid, mixed crossing? So crossing between two different species. So for example here, these are two species that live at the Stengl station, the pink rose, which you already know, and this Asteraceae that is called the golden wave thick seed. So they grow together at Stengl, and as you can see here, they both have the anthers in the center of the flower. These flowers are from like similar size, and they're both pollinated by bees. So I'm going to talk to you about two mechanisms that plants can use to avoid crossing with a different species. The first is relying on the bees, and the bees have something that we call a behavior that we call floral constancy. That means that once a bee goes out for a feeding trip, it is going to fixate on a specific color or shape of flower, and then it's going to go to that same type of flower, and that's like floral constancy. That's what it's called, floral constancy. So if a bee gets fixated in the morning in the pink rose, then it's just going to go to the pink rose. But if it gets fixated with the thick seed, it's just going to go to the thick seed. So thank you, bees. That's a way they can avoid mixed crossing. Another mechanism is that many species have a built-in recognition system. So that means that when the pollen gets to the stigma of the flower, there's going to be a recognition phase. So if the stigma recognizes that that pollen is not from the same species, then the pollen won't be able to germinate. So that is going to avoid the fertilization by a different species. Now, this is a different story. So what happens then if two species are closely related, so they are sister species, so they're going to be very similar, and they share the same pollinator because they live in the same place. In cases like this, evolution often pushes them to develop slightly different floral traits, so they can differentiate and locate their pollen in different places of their pollinator. So in these two cacti species that are sister species that live in part of the desert of Peru, they are from the genus Achiocereus. I'm sorry I didn't write the name there, but one of them has longer flowers. So the stamens are going to reach the top part of the head of the nectar buds, which are their pollinators. And the other species have shorter flowers. So in this case, the pollen is going to reach the snout of the nectar buds. So in that way, each species has its own place in the pollinator body, and they can avoid mixed crossing. This is very common in species that have a pollinator that is quite large. So nectar buds, hummingbirds. Here's another examples of the plants I studied for my PhD. The Costus system. We have Costus pulverulentus, which has a longer flower, and the anthers are going to deposit pollen close to the head of the hummingbird. And the second species, Costus scaber, has a shorter flower and is going to get the pollen deposited on the beak of the hummingbird. So again, this spatial separation is avoiding a crossing between two different species. So there we made it to the end of the functional floral traits. Now I'm going to move on to the story about my PhD research. So something that scientists have observed commonly is that there are cases where there are sister species co-occurring in a place, but each of them has a different pollinator. And this is an example from the Costus plants, where we have sister species. One is pollinated by hummingbirds, and the other one is pollinated by orchid bees. So at some time in the evolution of these species, or like the ancestral lineage, that lineage was pollinated by orchid bees, but when they split, or when the lineage split, one branch becomes being pollinated by hummingbirds. And this is something that scientists have seen in many families of plants, more than 120 different plant families. We observe sister species that have different pollinators. And that's one observation that motivated me and many other people to study, like, how is this happening? How is the evolutionary process that creates a new plant species pollinated by a different group of pollinators? So to study that, first I needed to find or to choose a species from the Costus system that is pollinated by orchid bees, and I chose this one that is called Costus malortianus. And I had to identify how a bee flower and a hummingbird flower in the Costus system are different. So if you compare these two, what is one difference that stands out? Size could be one.
The color.
Shape could be another one, and color. I like color because the story is about color. So we're gonna focus on color. Yeah, so I decided to modify the color of this flower. What we were trying to see is, or the hypothesis we have to explain how this new lineage evolved to be pollinated by a different group of pollinators, is that what it has to happen is that it has to have floral traits that will attract this new group of pollinators, but also has to have floral traits that is going to repel the older pollinator. So I decided to change the color and expose them to the pollinators. But first I will explain you my color modifications. So the original flower, which is here, Costus malortianus, is the same flower but just from two different angles. So I decided to change the color of the petals, and I paint them with a natural dye that is called carmine. I paint the petals to make it look red, more like a hummingbird flower. I also decided to remove the yellow lines that the bees use to know where the nectar is. So as you can see here, these flowers have two yellow lines, and we remove the yellow lines by putting or covering with another tissue. So as you can see here, this is an external tissue that is coming from a flower from the same species. So we have to cut a part of a different flower, and then using a needle and a thread, we sew this tissue on top of the flower. So here you can see that we have changed the color pattern of the flower. So then we have our plants growing in pots, and then we took them to the forest. We have the natural flowers, we have the red flowers, and we have the flowers that don't have the yellow lines. And we expose them to the pollinators. We were recording how long the bees and the hummingbirds took to find these flowers. And we have different hypotheses for the two different pollinators. We hypothesize that the hummingbirds will find faster the red flowers versus the natural flowers, because hummingbirds, are attracted to red colors. And we also hypothesize that, the hummingbirds, in the case of the flowers without nectar guides, there wouldn't be a difference between how fast they find the natural flowers with the flowers without guides, because they are using those traits. For the bees, we thought that they were gonna be slower with our experimental plants. They were gonna take more time to find the red flowers and the flowers without nectar guides. So in this way, what we are hypothesizing is a way that these changes are attracting the hummingbirds and are repelling the bees. So what we found is that the hummingbirds found faster the red flowers versus the white flowers, and they didn't show any difference in speed between the flowers with or without the yellow lines. So that's what we hypothesized, and that's what we found. For the orchid bees, we didn't find any difference in the time for finding the white flowers versus the red flowers, or the flowers with yellow lines or without yellow lines. So this was all contrary to our hypothesis. So we explained this result with thinking that the bees might be using a different floral trait to find these flowers. So it might not be the color, it could be the scent, because these flowers do have a scent. So maybe the scent is what helped them to find our flowers at the same time when they found the normal flowers, the control flowers. But I was curious about how the bees might be interacting with the flowers when they have to land on the flower and manipulate the flower to be able to reach the reward. Because the yellow lines are indicating something to the bee once they have landed on the flower. So we took a closer look to what was happening when the bees were feeding on these two different floral modifiers, two different flowers. This is the natural flower, and you can see the bee lands on the yellow part and it goes inside pretty fast. There you can see landing, getting ready, and going inside. But when we observe how they manipulate the flowers without the yellow lines, we saw that the bees were landing in the wrong place, and then they were taking more time to find where is the right place where my reward is. You're gonna see a second bee doing the same by landing on the wrong place and taking more time to find the right place to hold inside the flower. So the bees are spending more time to manipulate the modified flowers. Therefore, they could be repelled in this way because they're wasting more time to feed. So in nature, the bees may not come back to a flower that is too costly to feed on, so they will prefer species that they don't have to spend too much time to find their food. For this project, I modified many other floral traits, but overall, I think what I explained to you is enough to say that a lineage can evolve floral traits that will attract a new group of pollinators and also can deter the ancestral pollinator. So that's a mechanism of how a new plant species gets formed. And that's the end. We're going to recapitulate the talk before I can take your questions. So first, we should care about flowers because they give us food, clothes, medicines, beauty, and a home. And not only to us, but to other species with whom we share our home. Floral development is influenced by environmental signals and internal signals. And we have to be aware that environmental changes can change the time flowers are opening. And that can create a mismatch with their pollinators. Next, floral traits functions are to attract, to reward, and to feed their pollinators' body to achieve reproductive success. And finally, a new plant species can originate due to shifts between different pollinators, which can happen through changes in floral traits. So that is the end, and I'll be happy to take questions.
We have time for a few questions, so if you can raise your hands, I can bring a mic to you.
In order to find the significant difference in time of finding the flower, how many times did you have bees find the flowers?
Is the question referred to the last experiment?
Yes.
Can you repeat it, like something about time?
How many times did you have the bees try to find the flowers in order to show that there was a significant difference and that they were slower or faster with the colored flowers?
Yeah, we have these spots in the forest. We have 10 different replicates for the control, the natural plant, like 10 different stations with this natural plant, 10 different stations with the red flowers, and 10 different ones with the flowers without nectar guides. Yeah, that's an important thing because when you run experiments, you need replication, right? You cannot just do it once and say, yeah, that's what is happening. You need to do it multiple times, and then you get the same result, and you can say, okay, that's what is happening.
Are the orchid bees, are they more poisonous than regular bees, or are they the same?
Can you repeat?
Are the orchid bees the same amount poisonous as regular bees or not?
Poisonous or
Oh, yeah, when they sting you, that's a good question. I don't know when they sting you, the orchid bees only, well, the females sting you, but maybe scientists mainly use the male orchid bees for research. They don't have a sting. Maybe they haven't stung too many people yet, so I don't know. I don't think we know if it's more painful or less painful. I haven't been stung by an orchid bee. I have been stung many times by honeybees. So I don't know.
Are there any species of flowers where the spatial orientation of the flower, like that's hanging down or such, would impact the characteristics?
Yeah, the position of the flower how it stands out from the plant. It's an important floral trait I didn't talk about, but yeah, and that could be mainly for attraction, like to make it more visible for the pollinators. But in some cases, it also has to do with feeding the pollinator. Like a pale flower will feed good a pollinator that comes from below or something like that. But yeah, the position of the flower in the plant is an important floral trait. Yes.
Did any other pollinators come except the original to the modified flowers?
Can you repeat it into the mic so everyone can hear you?
Did you
Can't really hear. Oh.
I can repeat it, yeah. The question is if other pollinators came to our experimental flowers, right? Besides the hummingbirds and the orchids. Yeah. I don't think we got other pollinators coming. Maybe some butterflies. I'm trying to remember. I think some butterflies came to our flowers, but I think they were just trying to get some water from the surface of the flowers. They were really trying to feed on the nectar. And also something funny that happened is just a random bird that I couldn't even identify. It just flew very close to one of my plants and it broke my flower. Yeah. But it was very fast on the video. We don't know the species of the bird, but it kind of crashed with our plants. Yeah, ruined one of my experimental stations.
We have time for one more question. That's all right, go ahead. Sure, yeah. It doesn't matter.
over there?
It's on.
Is it true that organisms can be very confusing that if it's camouflaging or not into flowers?
Can you repeat? Is it true that I missed that word?
An organism can be very blend into a flower that is a same color.
Ruthie, can you repeat?
Can you repeat your question for her?
Is it true that a orchidist is very clever enough that is sorry.
Is it about an orchid bee or you're saying
Orchid
Orchid
mantis.
mantis. He's asking if it's true that an orchid mantis can camouflage itself on top of the orchid. Is that right? Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's about orchids mantis, but I haven't studied those insects, but it is true that many insects will camouflage to look like a flower. It happens with flies, maybe with orchid mantis, as you are saying. It could happen. I think, as far as I know about flies, a system that looks like an orchid. Yeah, so it could be true, but I couldn't tell you for sure. But thank you for your question.
Do you want to do the last one? Okay. Well, let's say thank you once again to Dr. Rossana for her lovely talk. Our next talk will be on October 9th. It's called Flora of the Living Dead. So I hope to see you all then.
So this is the spot? Like this is the place where you working? Where's your ant colony? Can we get it?
Maybe, yeah. Might look a bit suspicious, but yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I work here.
Nice.